Sarah Brannock. I am the leader of demand generation and field marketing at a B2B startup operating in the cybersecurity uh, industry called Hunters.
Mhm.
And I'm also just a general marketing nerd. I do marketing for work, but I also kind of eat, sleep, breathe marketing. It fascinates me. It always has.
Mm.
So I also do it for fun, and I have my own podcast called 7K Social Club, and it's part of the reason why I'm chatting with you today, Cameron. Is I just like to talk about marketing and
Mm.
to help people that are trying to learn more about the art and craft of marketing.
Nice. That was good. Obviously, you've done this before. Sarah, take me back to when you were first introduced to marketing. Like, what was that story of you like getting a hold of anything that was marketing? You were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I want to do this.
Yeah, so I was one of those people that studied, um, like I'm from Ireland originally, and we kind of specialize much earlier than you would in the US
Mm.
or in other countries. So I started off as like a business student, and I was a terrible student. I really struggled with accountancy and like statistics because I struggled with the concept that there's one answer.
Mhm.
I'm a lot more, philosophical than that. So
Mm.
when I finally got to study marketing, I became a much better student because I could really relate to it. So I
Mhm.
studied marketing in my undergraduate degree. I did a postgraduate in marketing as well, which somebody had asked me a few days ago, like, do you recommend doing a master's in marketing? And I told them, honestly, no. I think the best way to study marketing is to work in
Mm.
marketing or like do it as your own kind of side projects.
Mhm.
So I eventually interned in a tech startup in Boston, Massachusetts, when I was 23 years old, which is actually really old to be an intern in America. So people kind of made fun of me for that. But honestly, I think you can get into marketing at any stage of your career and you can learn it in any shape or form. If it is your calling, I think you should go for it.
Yeah. You mentioned that Ireland is a little bit more advanced when it comes to getting into the profession. Is that what you meant?
Not necessarily. I think in the US you can study kind of like general subjects. Like you could pick a number of different disciplines
Mhm.
versus in Ireland, it's like if you're going to study business, you need to study business from day one and you're studying,
Mm.
the disciplines of business. You're not able to combine like business and science and psychology and,
Mhm.
whatever other kind of areas there are, engineering. Like everything is quite specialized from the beginning
Mhm.
versus I think in the US, people can exit university with more of a generalized degree, and then they tend to go on to business school for that
Mm.
reason.
So I know when I went to college, like I never understood why we had to take all of the um, prerequisite classes just to get to our what they call over here like their major, and so like that's why I dropped out of school because I was like I just want to study like because I was wanting to be honest I didn't know what I wanted to study in college, but I wanted to take there was a marketing and advertising class, and then there was a like a business 101, and then all the like business classes, sales and stuff like that. And so I was like, I was asking my counselor, like, why can't I take those classes? And she's like, oh, we have to like basically like qualify for those classes. And then you have to take these prerequisite classes first. And the prerequisite classes had nothing to do with the major. And so that's when I was like, this is dumb. Like, why can't I just go learn that stuff? And so when you started your internship at that first company, what was your main like responsibilities and more so like when did you start seeing success in some of the marketing campaigns that you were running?
So I started off as a demand generation intern, and the program that I went over on like an internship visa,
Mhm.
um, and I was just really eager to get my foot in the door. Showed up kind of willing to do anything and everything. If you need me to update this big calendar that you have in the sales pit with all the details of the different campaigns that we're running, I'll update it. You need me to carry boxes of swag to a happy hour that's happening in the evening, like, I'm there. I'm like running up and down the stairs with boxes, sweating and panting, just happy to be there. So I did all things that any other employee kind of wanted to delegate to an intern.
Mhm.
So such a broad kind of area of responsibilities, but this
Mhm.
tech company was really cool. They were doing marketing to product marketing people.
Mm.
So it was quite marketing orientated, very
Yeah.
fun, cool brand.
Mhm.
The company spent a lot on its employees and, had a really nice office. So it was definitely like the glamorous side of tech, but doing unglamorous work that made me more motivated to kind of have a full time career following that path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Getting right into demand generation. So in our space, I know when I first contacted you about being on the podcast, you're like, you're in a completely different industry than mine. Like, how can I help? Um, in our space, we do a lot of lead generation, and we're very familiar with what lead generation is, and we're constantly gravitating toward agencies and third-party companies that offer some sort of lead generation tools or strategies or whatever it may have you. So, what is demand generation?
So I think of it as more lead generation is kind of like a push model where you're trying to push yourself and your services towards buyers
Mm,
versus demand generation is more of a pull methodology where you're attracting people who are interested in the service that you're trying to offer. And I think the best way to describe it is I think of it as, personal trainers or like people in the kind of health and wellness practitioner. Um, if you are in your house and you're eating tubs of ice cream
mhm,
and a personal trainer comes to the door and knocks on the door and says, "Hey, Cameron, let's go work out.
mhm,
It's time." You might not be in that headspace at all. It may not be you may not be motivated, you're not really in market for that right now versus if that personal trainer puts their content on Instagram or TikTok and you start seeing them in your feed because your mind is turning towards, hey, I do want to get healthier. I want to get fitter. Maybe you start following that person on social media, you start consuming their content. Maybe you
mhm,
access a free guide that they have or a calorie calculator, those types of things. And
mhm,
eventually you contact that personal trainer and say, hey, I want to work with you or I want one of your plans.
mhm.
That is essentially demand generation at work.
If there was like a, let's see, like if you were developing a would it be like a demand generation strategy? Like if you were developing that, what would be some of like the fundamental elements that that the I would say like the shareholders of the company should be considering?
I think your goal is the most important thing. So, what
Mm,
are you trying to achieve at the end of the day? And I think this is where lead generation often fails is with lead generation is always this mindset of like, we need more leads. We just need more leads. Knowing that your conversion rate is usually quite low because a lot of people aren't really expecting you to ask them for, or you to ask them for their business in that moment. Versus for demand generation, the conversion rates tend to be much higher because people kind of hear about you, they may keep you in the back of their minds, but eventually they'll surface and say, hey, I remember that you offer A, B, and C. I'm interested in this. I'm in market to buy. I've been following your stuff or I've been consuming your content. I'm
mhm.
familiar. I have budget. So the conversion rates tend to be a lot higher. So I think in your industry, even though I was telling you, Cameron, I was like, I have nothing to offer your audience because I don't know the real estate industry at all. But I do see demand gen working in real estate because people love to follow content and educated people about properties even when they're not in market to buy property. They may think, okay, in 3 years time we're going to grow out of this home and we want to move to our next home. You want to be following these people who are tapped into the market and are kind of advising clients on different areas or different investment types. So I think demand gen can be really useful in that sense.
I like the push and pull example that you have. Like lead generation is more of like getting in contact with people who are not, I want to say, like in that purchasing stage. And well, the intention of companies is to get them in that purchasing stage, but a very small amount of them are in that purchasing stage. And so, if you could do something for the majority of the individuals who are not, so to say, like ready to purchase right now, if you could do something for them. And it seems like what you're saying is like that's what the demand generation is there for, is to give them, I want to say, content or any sort of resources to help them get to that stage. Is that like, am I thinking about that correctly?
Absolutely. And then the thing that I really like at the moment is like personality led growth. Like
Mm,
often, we had this era of, when we think of we're hungry and we're on a road trip, we think maybe McDonald's drive through.
mhm,
But if you think of you're in real estate and you want your buyers to think of you as like, hey, when I'm in market to buy, like who are the three agents that I think of? And like
mm.
we always think of people like on those shows, like, those, what is it called? Like Millionaire something New York.
$1 million listing, yeah.
$1 million listing. Thank you. We think of those, like that's what I think of, those agents. You want to
Mhm,
be the equivalent of that for the people
mhm,
that you serve so that when they're in market to buy, they're thinking of you. They're not thinking of, Ryan Serhart or any of those characters on
mhm.
TV.
Yeah, 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 yeah. When it comes to the goal, what are some, like, examples of goals? Is it, like, business, like, increasing revenue goals or, like, increasing opportunity goals, or, like, what are some examples of goals?
Yeah, so I think the usually the main goal is you want to sell more product or you want to sell more of a service, and sometimes you want to sell both.
Mm,
So if you're trying to sell more product or service, you're thinking about ways that you can communicate the value of your product or service in a way that's interesting for potential buyers to consume.
mm,
So, like, I think podcasts are great because you get notified, if you're following a podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you get notified when the new episodes show up.
mhm,
So, you are always engaging with certain personalities and certain brands that you like to follow, regardless of whether you're in market for a product or service or not. And I
mhm,
think the thing that a lot of companies and people get wrong is thinking they have to pitch their product all the time or
mm,
their service all the time, versus if you're just creating interesting content on the kind of pain points that you solve and the value that you bring,
mm,
you don't have to sell. The content will do the selling for you
mm.
in a way that buyers or, potential future buyers, they don't feel like they're being sold to.
How would a company, like, figure out those pain points for the consumer?
I mean, if you take it back to the personal trainer, and you can also think of it, I'm in this state of mind, just it being January, and I'm trying to implement a morning routine where I work out early in the morning. So then when I finish my day, I can just go home and rest and go to bed early.
Mm,
Versus I used to have very much like a nighttime gym routine, and then I was tired the next morning.
mhm,
And you're getting advertisements for products like Whoop or Athletic Greens, like those types of products. And
mhm,
they often in their advertising or in the media, so Athletic Greens or AG1 is a
mhm,
sponsor of Joe Rogan's podcast,
mm,
and he mentions that product every now and then, that he has a discount code, but the majority of his content has nothing to do with AG1.
mm,
But again, a lot of his ethos around who he is and the content that he can create through his podcast is about fitness, personal growth, personal development, staying sharp, achieving a lot, making a lot of money, like those types of. I would say they're like the value, and then
mhm.
the opposite of the value is the pain point, right? How do I lose weight? How do I stay more focused in my job? How do I achieve more? How do I be more like Joe?
I actually get this question often when I talk to the real estate community about demand generation. So obviously, so like you're saying, like with Joe Rogan, he has developed a following. Is there things that the company can do to transition that or to turn that following into actual clients for themselves? Is there like a process to do that, or does it just naturally happen?
I think reverse engineering it in terms of when people have a need that your company can fulfill,
Mhm.
Like, what are they doing to find a solution to the problem? And a lot of
Mhm.
it is they're searching for content on the topic, whether it's Google search, like, how do I figure out, you know, how much can I afford to borrow from a bank?
Mhm.
Or how do I, wake up in the morning and not need 4 coffees to get through the day? I think those terms that if you can put yourself in the shoes of your ideal buyer, you want to
Mhm.
be reverse engineering their journey and understanding how you can bridge the gap between what they're looking for and what you offer.
When it comes to setting up this, like, demand gen engine, if you will, like, are there some metrics to keep track of to know if I'm doing it well?
Yeah, I think there are so many factors that will depend on like the size of your business, or if you're just an individual trying to create demand for your own product or service. Let's
Mhm.
say if you're an individual and you're trying to create demand for your own product or service, I think the KPIs or the key performance indicators that you have within your control are really important to start with. So,
Mhm.
let's say social media is the method in which you're trying to attract new customers, ensuring that you're posting a certain number of times each week and then seeing, okay, I posted 3 times a week, every week for the last 6 weeks. How many views am I getting? How many comments am I getting? Are people actually interested in this content? Am I reaching the right people?
Mhm.
And it may not lead to conversions being, sales conversations or sales, but
Mhm.
that's okay because you could be getting feedback saying, "Hey, I am somebody who's gonna buy a home in the next 2 years, and this content really helped me." And you might
Mhm.
think, "Yes, that I'm moving in the right direction."
Mhm.
Um, but typically, if you're in a larger organization, you need firm KPIs around, okay, how much are we spending on content creation or advertising? How many leads are we getting in terms of people engaging with that content,
Mhm.
or people searching for us on the internet? And then how many conversions are we actually getting in terms of how many sales are coming through? Like, that's really, a lot of my job is owning a certain number, and trying to work backwards for it with a bunch of stakeholders and figuring out, okay, how are we going to achieve a certain level of growth this year,
Mhm.
given, a certain budget.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Would you have any advice on, like, choosing platforms, like, knowing what, like, social media platforms to be on?
I think it depends on your audience, like who are you trying to reach? And I think asking like your ideal customers what
Mhm.
they like to consume, where they spend their time, that will lead you in the right direction. I also think, um, everybody has a kind of natural method of communication. Some people are really, really great at writing. And if
Mhm.
you're great at writing, you're probably better off posting on LinkedIn or having a blog, uh, doing those types of things. Twitter is kind of not so thriving at the moment, so
Mhm.
maybe Twitter, maybe not, or
Mhm.
X, as I should say.
Yeah.
But if you're good at video, short form video, or it's becoming longer form now, TikTok is probably where the very fast growth can happen for you as a
Mhm.
creator. I also think YouTube Shorts is getting really popular, but it seems to be difficult for people to figure that one out. And then I personally love podcasts. It's probably, or it's part of the reason why I'm chatting with you this
Mhm.
evening, Cameron, is I think just listening to casual conversations, you can learn so much and you can also multitask.
Mhm.
So if you're someone who wants to, approach people and have conversations and you're willing to put in a certain amount of work each week, I think podcasts can work great too.
Mhm.
Honestly, any platform can work. It's about figuring out what works for you and also what works for your audience.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, definitely being aware of where your audience is at. It's so interesting, like, because kind of like going back to the fundamental components, like basically what you laid out is like, okay, understand your consumer to a point to where, um, and I believe this is what you're talking about when you talk about their buying journey. It's like, what platforms are they consuming content on? What problems are they dealing with that then this company can come along and solve with their products or services. And so in order to do the solving for the company, then you really have to understand like their problems, like everything that's going on with that consumer. And so yeah, I love that. What are some of the I want to say biggest challenges that you see companies are experiencing when it comes to creating a demand gen strategy for themselves? But then I also keep in mind that like you're working within the company, and so like if you're open to sharing like anything that I want to say like um, big challenges that maybe Hunters was experiencing that you came in and then fixed.
Yeah, so when I joined, it was a 50-person company, and now we're like close to becoming a 200-person company. So
Oh wow.
there's been, challenges are constant, right? You're always facing some type of challenge,
Hmm.
um, and the challenges are always changing. But I
Hmm.
think from a general perspective, most companies, when it comes to like demand generation, and when you think of demand gen, you think of it as creating demand and also capturing demand. So
Hmm.
it's not enough to like invest all of your time in creating demand if you're not able to capture it and convert it into sales. And I
Hmm.
think where people get stuck is the short term pressure to hit goals. So every business will have quarterly goals to bring in a certain amount of business. And demand generation is all about maintaining long term relationships and having people buy based on what's best for them and their timelines and not being too salesy or too aggressive. So I think hitting that sweet spot between, you know, generating the demand and being customer centric,
Hmm.
but also being able to capture the demand, hitting your own number, keeping your boss happy and their boss happy is the biggest challenge.
Hmm.
And some people are able to do that really, really well, and other people struggle.
So you said demand generation is broken up into two. There's creating demand and then there's capturing demand. You said capturing demand is the process of turning, I want to say like people who are interested in actually purchasing from you into actual customers. What's creating demand?
Creating demand is essentially the awareness. It's like, how do you let people know that you exist and your
Mm.
business exists? It's all
Mhm.
about getting your value out there, getting your message out there, educating the market.
Mhm.
And it's also extremely necessary when you're coming up with like new product categories. Like I mentioned, two brands there in the health and wellness space, which is Whoop and AG1, and
Mhm.
nobody had any idea what those things were. There was a time when nobody was wearing fitness trackers. They were probably only for really, really niche athletes
Mhm.
in professional sports. But now, a lot of people will wear a fitness tracker just because they're interested in that data. Same
Mhm.
thing with the supplementation industry. People are taking so many supplements. There's a lot of awareness that the food that we eat now isn't as nutritious as it was, 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Mhm.
So that is all education um, that is required for this demand creation. The only reason people want to consume these products is because they've been educated that they're lacking certain things in their diet or that they can benefit from having extra data that can help them live a more productive life or perform better in sports.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense now. You mentioned product category. This is kind of like a question from me because I've been trying to do my best to define what like categories are. Like, could you define like what a product category is and like maybe give an example of it?
Yeah, so for my day job, it's a lot more unsexy, unglamorous. You know,
Mhm.
I'm working for a business that sells cybersecurity solutions. So
Mhm.
there are so many different cybersecurity categories within the niche of cybersecurity. Um, I won't even get into that now because it would probably melt your brain. There are so many acronyms.
I can
Um,
imagine.
but I think a category I don't know, how would you describe a category? Like, even within your own industry, I assume
Uh-huh.
there are categories of, businesses there and also the type of practitioner.
Yeah, because how I think about categories are, um, I want to say, I want to say like consumer talking topics, if you will. Like that's how I think about it. And so like for example, in the real estate space, um, let's see, the process of going about buying a home for the first time. And so like that's like a category. Unless I'm wrong. Like that's why I'm still like trying to clarify what an actual category is. And so yeah, I always thought it was just like the topic of conversation that had to do with the either like the problem that they're experiencing or the solution of my product or service. And so I'm trying to think of like a cybersecurity example. Hmm.
I
So
think
maybe oh good.
in, in, like, the B2B, like, business to business trade and marketing, I think it's more so aligned with the budgeting process of
Mm,
every single department within the business has a budget. They have
mm,
budget for tools. So there's like an accounting, like a payroll category. There's staffing as a category. There's a CRM, to log all of your contact information, emailing solutions.
yes.
Same thing happens in cybersecurity, right? They need tools that will prevent, email phishing. They need tools called a firewall that's going to block, certain,
Mm,
people trying to penetrate the network. So I think that is what I mean in terms of categories.
mhm,
And if you think of, any store that you walk into, whether it's a grocery store or a sporting goods store, like those are categories in terms of how they divide the premises in terms of where you shop for what item. They
yeah.
would consider all of those different groupings of items as categories.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I over the past I mean since I've been attempting to to transition over to the demand gen side, that was one of the things that like I said I was like, man, like, I understand like creating content to help the consumer to empower the consumer to make better decisions when it comes to purchasing what I have to offer. But then when it came to the categories, I was like, man, like um for one of the clients that I'm actually running marketing for right now, I can see it, but it's very hard to explain. And an analogy for categories that I also have is like different lenses, like looking at, for example, looking at cybersecurity from a budgeting lens. And so it's like, all right, cool. Well, how much is it going to cost? How much is it going to how much is it going to cost to implement, like the actual purchase of it? How much is it going to cost to implement? How much is it going to cost to train my employees to now manage the cybersecurity? Forgive me if I'm like not, saying the right things in cybersecurity, but that's how I think about it. It's like a lens of looking at your solution. So it seems like we're saying the same thing. We're just saying it differently.
Yeah, I think
uh,
so. I think
yeah.
even like if I think of real estate, I would say, like your primary residence is like a category versus
Mm,
vacation home is a category.
mm,
Um, you know, I think just grouping certain goods based on similar and different characteristics, I think that's
mhm.
essentially categorization.
Yes, yes, yeah. Your podcast, you run a podcast called the 7K Social Club Podcast. If you guys haven't checked it out, go ahead and check it out. Um, I did want to know the individuals that you've brought on because I checked out like a couple of the episodes that you had, and I noticed that you're always featuring somebody new. Is there some sort of like methodologies or frameworks or strategies or maybe even philosophies that you've learned from an individual that you've implemented in your life? And if so, how has it impacted your life? Kind of like a loaded question, but
I think that's the beauty of the podcast. Like I started out 2 years ago trying to kind of build up my profile using LinkedIn,
hmm
which is, the primary network or the primary social network in my industry.
hmm
So trying to get kind of my name out there and get better at writing, communicating my thoughts. And that attracted more opportunities, public speaking and meeting interesting people. And the podcast was really an opportunity to, one, encourage other people to do the same, women mostly. I find
Mm,
a lot of um, a lot of women work in B2B marketing, but the voices that we tend to hear tend to be male voices
mm,
predominantly. I think women have a lot of self-doubt and they question their ideas and their authority. And what I wanted to do was encourage more women to put themselves out there on social media and attract opportunities that otherwise would not, find them or reach them. So
mhm,
that was the first thing. And then through interviewing people that are more successful and more confident than I am, I just learned so much from each of them. They all bring very unique things to the table. They've all got their unique stories. And I think the concept that has carried through the entire podcast is two parts to it. One is using social media to grow demand for your own, personality, for
mhm,
yourself as talent, and
mhm,
also using social media to grow your business, whether you own and run your own business or whether you're working for a business owner.
mhm,
So that has been kind of the joy of this podcast, not really knowing 100% what the idea was going to turn out, but doing
mhm.
it anyways, launching myself in, I think has been the best way of learning because I thought about it for, months and months, if not over a year. Should I do it? Should I not do it? Can I commit to it? Will I be good enough? Will I be terrible? But finally getting over that fear of self-judgment, I've learned a lot.
Nice. And you're really good. I mean, just to commend you on, starting a podcast. I know lots of us are like have that thing that we're talking about in our head and we're like, I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. But for whatever reason, there's some sort of barrier. And in my experience, I've learned that it's usually fear of whatever. And it sounds like it was the same to where it's like, man, am I going to sound weird? Am I not going to be good at it? What if I don't say the right thing? And so, you sound amazing on your podcast. I was listening to, I believe it was the first episode. Forgive me, I don't remember the actual name of the episode. But yeah, you sound very natural on when you're talking to the individuals that you're speaking to, and even now when you talk about all the stuff that you're talking about, you sound like really natural. And so,
Thank you, Cameron. I
yeah,
appreciate
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Very kind.
Uh, um, are there so I do this thing. So I obviously like interviewing individuals like yourself. I interview top producing real estate agents and CEOs of real estate companies. The last question I always like to ask them is if there is anything that you are currently experiencing that is a challenge for yourself, whether it's for your actual profession within your company or maybe even personally. Um, yeah, if there's anything like challenging right now that maybe somebody I interview, 7 podcasts from now may have the answer to. Is there anything right now that you're experiencing in your career that is a little bit challenging that you're trying to, get over the hump on?
It's going to sound very general, but I think time is my biggest challenge at the moment, where
Mm,
I think when you start out initially in your career, you have more time than you do opportunity.
mm,
So you're kind of, looking for those opportunities everywhere and you're willing to follow anything that comes.
mhm,
Versus now I'm at a point where I've been very fortunate to put in that time and now I have the opportunities and I have a lot less time.
mm,
So it's trying to focus on the things that matter most
mhm,
while not having 100% certainty what your path is, but trying to create that certainty within,
mhm.
because you can't just spend all day and all week questioning, like, is this right? Because you'll never be present in the moment. So I
Yeah,
think that's my biggest challenge right now.
interesting. What if you don't mind me asking, like, what's your I don't like saying like end goal, but like, what's your like I want to say like end game that you want to be completely in. Is it doing demand generation for a company like Hunters, or is there something that you're striving for more of?
I do love demand generation as a concept because I think it's a much better way to sell
Mhm,
because of this pulling people towards you rather than trying to push, you know, yourself or your product and service.
mhm,
So I do see that carrying forward throughout my entire career, and I would love to be, one of those people who's really known for that discipline.
mhm,
But I think I feel a calling towards content creation, whether it's,
mm,
long form like podcast or short form interviewing people. I really enjoy that. I really enjoy trying new things and doing things that are unexpected.
mhm.
So I'm not sure where that will lead me, but I do feel happier when I'm consistently creating and also focusing on the art of creation and not getting so hung up on the numbers and the results.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's super cool. Yeah, you're probably gonna have a podcast or whatever it is that's like content creation, and I'm gonna be. Don't get me wrong, Sarah. I'm gonna be on LinkedIn. I'll be like, I know her. I interviewed her on my podcast.
I can't wait.
Yeah, yeah.
You'll
Well,
have to
Sarah,
come on
I've
my podcast then.
yeah, 100%. I don't know. That's interesting. It's kind of like the same conversation as when I first contacted you because as soon as you said it, I was like, "Oh, I don't know what knowledge I could give to your guys' audience because you guys are in a completely separate space, but shoot, maybe we could find a way to work it out." Um, Sarah, I really appreciate the time, especially for someone like yourself who's working in a company like Hunters. I know you really, really busy, especially this time of year. I don't know if I have another friend that works for a SaaS company, a very big one, and they wrap up their year at their I believe it's called fiscal year is the end of January. And so he's like just super extremely busy right now. And so I appreciate the time so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Cameron. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I wish you all the best with this podcast.